G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day and a fantastic weekend. Now you'll notice that I'm not in my typical studio. I spoke about this earlier last week, but I've had to travel interstate for a funeral. It was also why I had to travel interstate a few weeks ago as well to say my goodbye. So for a couple of days, it is going to be a little bit different and it may affect the quality of the audio, the visual. Well, the visual's not helped much by this bloody head, but it's just going to be the way it is. Anyway, today we do have a fair bit to go over. We're going to talk about Patriot systems. Of course, we're going to look at the maps as the deep state, the MOD map, whatever you want to call it, has caught up to what is actually happening on the ground a little bit. Of course, we know sometimes that is in front, sometimes it lags behind. All maps have some level of bias and they all get then their information from different spots. We're also going to talk about, in a folder I've just put, the reality on the ground, because there's been a significant shift and everyone has seen this, no matter the telegrams you're in, no matter the YouTubes you watch, no matter the mainstream corporate media. However, even if it's my reporting, there has been this shift away from everything's going great to this swing of like, maybe things aren't going so fantastically. And we're going to talk a lot about that, as well as the capability increase we've seen from Russia amidst reports, lots of reports coming out that the Russian military has been completely rebuilt to that the Russian military is more powerful and larger now than it was when they first invaded in 2022. Now, one thing I will say on just a bit of housekeeping first, is typically I use a teleprompter to look at quotes, and what I'm going to do next, I didn't have room to pack that, so I'm going to be looking down at my phone a bit. I'm sorry, I'm not being rude. But Dmitry Kuleba, of course, is the foreign minister of Ukraine. Now, Minister of Foreign Affairs, sorry. What we have seen recently was he was really get quoted saying, I'm not going to play nice with asking for Patriot systems, that it's not working. I'm going to have to, reach out and sort of grab it by the horns and request that's what we have. Now, we know that Zelensky has said they want 25. Kuleba has said they need at least 7, so 1 for every city and 1 sort of roving as well. So we're going to talk about what has come out today. Now, we don't have confirmations on which country this is, how this is actually going. Now, Ukraine is conducting active negotiations with its partners to receive 2 additional batteries of the Patriot air defense system and 1 long-range SAM-T anti-aircraft missile battery. But that said, we don't know where these are coming from. Most likely Europe. Some people are pointing at Spain and France. We're not particularly sure, but what we are sure of is that Ukraine is desperate for more air defense. Ukraine cannot keep what is happening to it currently with how the amount of success that these missiles are having on critical infrastructure targets, military targets, everything. As well, I put critical infrastructure and military in separate baskets. I think they deserve a separate basket, but at the same time, if you look at the laws of armed conflict, the overall laws of war, then these come down to a dual use target. So these can be targeted. You can strike then critical infrastructure. Now, this does continue here of what he's actually said. We know for sure the location of everything. At the moment, active negotiations concerning 2 batteries of the Patriot air defense systems and 1 of the SAM-T systems are ongoing. Basically, if the countries where these systems are located, we're ready to supply us with them, then it would take a week for us to receive them. So he has spoken about how long they would come in and what then is being requested. Now, in my folder here, then called the reality on the ground. This is something that I think is really worth talking about, but I've just got one step ahead of myself. Normally this would be on my thing of what we want to speak about, but we do have footage from Zaporizhia. So let's have a look at where this is. Of course, this is the map out on this. Of course, we have Ukraine in the center, the capital of Kyiv. The red area is occupied since 22 and the purple since 14. Now, Zap is down here. So still close to the front line. You do forget when you're in Zap, you do forget that it's only 34 kilometers as the crow flies away from the front. You can still hear things going down, but it does seem like well, at least when I was there, and that was a while back, it does seem like a fairly normal city. Now, we do have footage of a glide bomb or glide bombs striking in the industrial zone here. And this is something that we've seen really this shift of the amount of ISR assets. So we're seeing that Russia has drones over these areas getting high quality footage and high quality targeting in Zap, in Odessa from these drones. That is something that's definitely we've seen an increase in the past few months, as well as now the success of these high explosive or high yield glide bombs wreaking havoc anywhere on the front line. The reason they're wreaking havoc, one, you're not going to hit a glide bomb with a Patriot. It doesn't make sense in war economy. But what you need to hit is the plane. Air defense is limited. Air defense is protecting what it needs to protect as absolute highest priority. Therefore, those planes are not going to be hit, and they can drop them from behind the line very quickly. So I digress. We need to talk about what I was going to speak about before on this reality on the ground. Now, I put up a poll yesterday. We've spoken the last couple of days about, has Russia rebuilt its forces? Why would officials be saying that Russia's rebuilt, that they're more powerful? Is it because they have rebuilt and they're more powerful? Or is there some underlying propaganda information bit here as well to try and push more funding into Ukraine as well? So I put, and I should say too, these are not mutually exclusive. I'll put this here because my poll, well, somewhere in the middle, I guess that's the answer for that. Some people complained that there wasn't sort of a yes to the all above. I thought that was it. But has the Russian military been rebuilt? Doing the poll again with more options. I fucked it the first time and apparently I fucked it the second time. But yes. No, this is a ploy to drum up more support to Ukraine to show that Russia is a threat to NATO. So what I mean by this is what we've been hearing really, I want to say last 6 months, because pre that, all we heard was Russia's being defeated. They've got no missiles. Sanctions have hit them. They don't have Coca-Cola in the stores and you can't get champagne and therefore they can't get any chips and all of this, that they're gone, strategically defeated. Now we're hearing, last 6 months, Biden, any official out there saying, if we don't stop it here, they're going to Poland, they're going to Germany, and it will be your sons and daughters then fighting on the front line. And those missiles are now hitting Kyiv, will be hitting our cities. And that has been, I think, a very difficult shift for people to get around. Now, third, neither. The losses were not as high as reported. The forces have learnt and increased effectiveness. Now, this one probably should have been in too. But you know how I feel with any claims of losses. Even at the end of the war, we'll get a broad range of missing in action, killed in action, wounded in action. We'll get a range of that. But I don't believe any numbers coming out. Firstly, because it would be impossible to get that to a numerical figure every single day, but as well that has a huge information misinformation purpose. And we see that every day Ukraine then updates with something like this, typically shows between 800 and 1,000 killed, and updates with other equipment. This is more easy to actually get, say, if an aircraft or something has been shot down, but as well, none of this information, but some is like verified photograph of at least what is then released publicly. But as well in this, that the Russian forces have learned an increased effectiveness. We know this has happened. Look at the ISR capability. Look at the troop movements on the ground. Look at the armoured movements. Look at the use of FABs. You're bound after more than 2 years of incredibly high tempo, high loss war to get better at that game of war. And that is a problem. It is a problem as well for the West because the country is getting all the experience from this war, the combat experience. We're getting a lot of experience logistically, diplomatically, whatever. But the combat experience, the armor, the infantry, the planes, the pilots, everyone, it's Ukraine and Russia getting this experience, and we're sort of trickling in some there. And it is dangerous having Russia having this much experience, and I guarantee China's looking in on that too. We'll talk more about that later. And we're trying to get some experience back off the Ukrainian soldiers. I do think there's this white knight syndrome, if you'll call it, this Western savior syndrome of NATO soldiers. NATO standard soldiers, you're not some super SAS Mando Delta. You've just gone through the sort of 6-month pipeline of training. The experience in my entire unit, the combat experience of my entire battalion, was less than some Ukrainian bloke who spent a week on the front line here and may have had a few weeks of training. Yes, the gun drills and whatever may be more slick and it may look better on a video. Combat experience is incredibly important, and we need to also learn backwards on that as well and learn what things work and what things then don't. But we're going to talk more about those losses. Now, I think these claims that have come about that that Russia is out of missiles, and then there's been this big switch. We see like Budanov said this back in January 2023. Russia has enough missiles for only 2 large-scale attacks. Now, of course, that isn't true. We've had many large-scale attacks from then, but it may have been true given the information available and also the informational war that was trying to be won, the propaganda war, when you've got at that time millions of Ukrainians living in the cold. But let's have a look at some of these headlines because, of course, the narrative has changed massively. So BBC today, they have an article about defeat, that the former commander of Britain's Joint Forces Command has warned Ukraine could face defeat by Russia in 2024, that there is a serious risk of Ukraine losing the war. The reason he says is because Ukraine may come to feel it can't win. And when you get to that point, why will people want to fight and die any longer just to defend the indefensible? And this is exactly what we are seeing with the manpower shortages in Ukraine. The manpower shortages in Ukraine are caused by multiple things. Again, it's not one. It never is one. Yes, it is MIA, KIA, WIA on the front line. Of course that has a factor. But the factor is too, there's still plenty of men in Ukraine. They're not going to the recruitment offices, and there's men trying to leave the country as well. That is the real big factors then affecting this. And of course, this is affecting morale. We'll talk more on that in a second. This is what I've been trying to get across for the last couple of weeks. At some point this summer, we expect to see a major Russian offensive with the intent of doing more than smash forward with small gains to perhaps try and break through the Ukrainian lines. And if that happens, we'd run the risk of Russian forces breaking through and then exploiting into areas of Ukraine where the Ukrainian armed forces cannot stop them. So there's a whole psychological aspect that is going here. And I've spoken to friends of mine in Ukraine, and I watch on not only war pages, but other social pages around this and how people are feeling too. And that this war is having such a huge psychological effect because there isn't any hope of an end within months or years. And we're going to talk about a 2025 offensive. And of course, high losses on the front. Everyone has friends who have not come back. Now, the hopes are set on conscripting now hundreds of thousands of men for then a 2025 offensive. And there's no guarantee of what the end state will be. There's no clear and realistic end state given the variables we are seeing at the front line. What is the clear end state? What is realistically for that end state for people's morale, the psychological effect, and like the command says here, to defend the indefensible. Now, I'm not saying that everything is lost, but what I'm saying is this is having a huge psychological effect, especially this swing of propaganda back from what we spoke about. Now, I think to the detriment of Ukraine and the West, after nearly a century of fear-mongering about the Soviet Union and Russia in the years that followed, often referred to as the Russian anxiety, has completely failed in this war, and seeing the capability that Russia, not only wartime, but productivity and product that they can produce, completely underestimated all of that, which it shouldn't have been because of this anxiety that we've had about this, massive superpower, as it will say. Of course, I know that propaganda has an effect that Russia outwardly display that, and we let them display that, as well as talk it up ourselves, because then it justifies our trillions of dollars in spending and to other groups around the world too. But even if we take the numbers that Ukraine is publishing, these numbers here, take this as true. Take it, pre-2022, pre this war, would have we said that these numbers would have collapsed Russia into an oblivion of which they cannot recover from, both population and equipment, and couldn't fight on? That's my question for you. These numbers right here, is this numbers that pre-2022, if there was a all-out war with Russia, we would have said that this is strategically ineffective and unrecoverable, because we're seeing the recovery. People are saying it's better than before. I want to point out that in World War II, there was 8 to 10.7 million soldiers die from war-related injury and illness, and some 80,000 tanks destroyed. Now, of course, I know that was the Soviet Union. It was far greater, and those wars were more infantry attritional focused, but I think you can draw a lot of similarities between those wars with that, what we're seeing now. Of course, I know the technology is more involved, but I know there's differences, but still then, I know it's taken now, still recovering from that, but would have we said that losing 26 warships and boats was a complete annihilation of Russia? I don't think we would have said that. I don't think we would have said that of a country of 144 million people with an obvious huge industrial base and strong allies in the south. Now, Henry Kissinger talks about Russia in his book World Order, of course before this war, but he says, talking about Russia, it has started more wars than any other contemporary major power, but it also thwarted domination of Europe by a single power, holding fast against Charles XII of Sweden, Napoleon, Hitler, when key continental elements of the balance had been overrun. That Russia, only to return again like a tide crossing a beach from Peter the Great to Vladimir Putin. Circumstances have changed, but the rhythm has remained extraordinarily consistent. So the ability to sustain massive loss, human life, equipment as well, it all comes into this. And what I want to think about is think about what we were told pre-2022. We know some of that is false, but we also know some of it, because we've spoken about how propaganda needs to have an underline of truth. What if we thought that the losses were irrecoverable? We know that they're probably far less than that. And on that article about offensive, he also says that it cannot be ruled out and that Ukraine is at its most fragile moment in over 2 years of war. And that is not just because there's wavering support from the US. It's also because Russia has increased its capability on the front lines. Now, let's speak about a counteroffensive. We know that offensive has to come at some point. Psychologically, Ukraine need to give people of Ukraine, the Ukrainians who are going to volunteer or be conscripted, hope for what can happen, for the goals of what the government is saying. And that is going to need to show improvements on the front line, as well as it's going to have to show outwardly to the countries supporting them that their goals are which they have said we're not budging on any of these goals, we're not willing to sit at the table until these goals are achieved. Well, it needs to show that it can then do that if more billions, tens, hundreds of billions are going to be fed in. Now, this comes from French newspaper Le Figaro, that Ukraine promises the West to launch a counteroffensive in 2025 if it is helped to hold out 2024. Saying, help us hold out for 24 and 25. We will be able to resume the offensive. Saying they need more missiles for these systems, not the system itself. But according to these French militaries, the first to mobilise will win. Well, it depends on how many mobilisations you're going to have. Both sides need to take a decisive step. We know Russia recently has had somewhere in the vicinity of 400,000 and mobilisations as well. In Ukraine, society is showing signs of fatigue from a war that seems hopeless, even if what is at stake is vital. In Russia, the Kremlin regime would prefer to avoid an unpopular decision that could spark domestic opposition. But from what we're looking at in Russia, it looks like there's still a heap of people still volunteering, and that the need for conscription may not be as high. And we see the opposite of that then happening in Ukraine, especially with the main article on the Kyiv Independent today was this: equipped and outgunned Ukrainian military often can't evacuate its wounded. That it can take a day or even two for soldiers to get in and out of the fiercest fighting spots because of FPV drones, but they also don't have enough evacuation vehicles that can't get into these areas, things like M113s and BMPs. That they say that it is so critical that there's between 300 and 600 infantrymen, they only have one M113 or BMP each, jeopardizing the evacuation. Now, I myself, of course, everyone in the army does first aid, and then select people can go and do combat first aid. Everyone knows this whole hour, the golden hour, the window for severe injuries is 60 minutes, the golden hour. If you're lasting days, there would be a lot of people who had survivable injuries who have died because of these. And again, the reality, I think, is coming of what is actually on the front line. Time, like water running through a bloody, carving its way through the earth. Time always comes the truth. And we're seeing what is happening on the front line. And of course, this is affecting people to sign up. And I'd like to know, as a democratic vote, for a democratic vote in Ukraine, for the continuation of everyone from people living there and soldiers, disregard the people that have moved into Europe. I'm sorry, but like, for the people that are under this every day, how is the feeling of the continuation of war? Now, number 3, the root problem has remained the same throughout the war. There's a deficit of these weapons, and the Ukrainian army is extremely equipment poor and medical poor. Back to the Soviet legacy, where Soviet Union didn't really expect to bring anybody back. Unfortunately, the attitude hadn't been sucked out of the Ukrainian system properly. But unlike Russia, Ukraine is facing a critical manpower shortage, especially for infantry, as it struggles to find recruits to refill the heavy losses. Now, as well, what they speak about in this, and I'm really surprised Kyiv Independent put this out, was about these evacuation orders. And this is no different to what we've reported on, especially from that first-hand account in Avdiivka, being left, radios turned off, no replies, leave the guys, come, go, whatever, you're left behind. High Command's decision to send men to defend positions as long as they can. The evacuation would not have been as chaotic if the decision was made a few weeks earlier. We look at my thumbnails for Avdiivka in the weeks prior. It's time to leave, and me like this. Ukraine need to go. Didn't happen, and we know a heap of guys got left behind, and that was highly criticised by a lot of people. Now, some soldiers were given the order to withdraw at any cost, leaving the wounded and fallen comrades behind. So, of course, what I'm trying to speak about is just the overall sort of psychological problem that this is having. Now, enough of me blabbing. Let's have a look at the maps. As I have said, this map has caught up. So we're just going to go where these areas are showing. Of course, this red means that there has been confirmed Russian advancement. Then we have seen, now this map has caught up to the movement we're seeing out from Ivanovsky and out near Boronivka. It's not showing the amount we see between here, of course, in Chasiv Yar, where we're speaking that there may be some break-in, but we're not sure. But Boronivka has come under complete Russian control, and that Russia is moving out through this forest area in Ivanovsky. Now, just to the north of here, there's no change. We saw some grey zone move around this Vyomynka front. Now, we will talk about this because there is a Syriac map update here. So this area where it's talking about is sitting just, you can see where this curves around to the left. This is this same curve. So just in this area, pointing out that it's 3.5 kilometers away from then Vyomynka itself, so 2 miles. Situation on the eastern front, Russian army made new advances northwest of Berestov. Troops are now 3.5 k's from there. Now, back onto this map. Let's come down. Now, we see around the Avdiivka front, this is where we see these major shifts out from the north of Berdachi, out from Krasnohorivka. This is catching up on a movement we've seen out near these drain line as well in this area. So that is interesting to see, as well as, if you've seen any of my videos, we've talked that this has likely been closed up, and now it is confirmed. We had NOAA reports, Syriac maps, other maps overlaid, saying that between this sort of Umansk, Vodiana front, Pervomaysky, that this had likely closed up between here. Now, many maps will show that this is far different. We'll go on then the Syriac here. See this funny shaped paddock here, sort of the seat looking one, so it's here. Many are saying that it's more where this grey is actually under Russian control, but it is catching up there. And what you can see, probably better on this map, is the advantage that then puts down this Nevelsky Pervomaysky front here, because it is entrapping this, and of course has shortened what was the front line just up here, therefore having a higher amount of soldiers in a smaller area for Russia to maybe push to the south and close up other areas. So I believe this we may see close up as well. And the advantage moving, of course, on then the open ground. And as every inch that pushes back means that those bombers that are delivering the FABs can go an inch further. But you can see moving across this open ground that they will then get some cover in these, but of course pushing up to the second line of defense for Ukraine out from Urmansk. These areas, probably this map's better, through here where these reservoirs are, will be very challenging as well. Now, I don't think we have any other shifts shown on this map. No, we don't. We know the situation now by Livka is probably worse than this map is showing, taken from other Ukrainian maps as well. But let's speak then about that. Very bad situation for the Ukrainian army in Novomyelivka. Russian army pushing from north and south forced Ukrainian troops to retreat from the southern trenches of the town towards Pakharovsky. So they're moving out to here as this pushes. Now, what we do know, this map is sitting more so something like this. That is what we believe there. Now, we do need to talk about Bakhmut, Chasiv Yar. I did forget that I had an update on this area. Of course, we have those FABs being dropped there. The bombardment of Chasiv Yar already considerably exceeds that of Bakhmut. Guided bombs have revolutionized the dynamics of the front. Relatively inexpensive bombs, which do not require great precision, but which allow considerable damage to be done in the area around the impact. You're talking a 3,000 kilogram bomb. That doesn't need to be accurate to make a huge effect on target, especially by the amount. This type of weapon has been elemental in destroying the Avdiivka defences and remains so far the trench system encountered by the advancing Russian forces. So they're just smashing away and rolling into defences that are significantly less. And this is a problem for the defences we see that Ukraine and Zelensky are showing up around Kharkiv, Kherson. Those defences, they're great against armour, infantry. They're not going to stand up to a 3,000 kilogram, even 500 kilogram FAB if Ukraine can't get air defence. Well, what is stopping FABs being dropped on those? A situation that is somewhat reminiscent of the Syrian war when the Air Force made use of barrel bombs due to lack of ammunition. These low-cost bombs were instrumental in destroying rebel positions and paving the way for an offensive. We should not expect a collapse of Ukrainian defences with these guided bombs, but we will see how will it accelerate the advance because of their destructive power, but delivered systematically and not through a general bombing campaign. Locations in the past were unable to be taken by Russians and now being taken by the Russian army. This is exactly what we've seen out of Bakhmut, in Avdiivka, in Novomyelivka, in Krasnodarivka, is the increased use of these dumb guided bombs. And I spoke to a friend of mine in the Air Force, Australian Air Force, and said, we need to look at this war and go, what's working, what's not working. The militaries around the world should be just looking at FPV drones. It is easy to learn to fly an FPV drone. Every infantryman should have training of how to fly these drones. 100%. But I spoke to him about these unguided bombs and the cost effectiveness of these. And I said to him, like, is it time to bring back the supersonic F-111 with dumb bomb glide bombs on them, because that is what is working. Anyway, legends. I hope this one wasn't too bad. I sort of got lost and I'm not used to just this, and I've had a very, very long day. Look after yourself, and I'll speak to you very, very soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.